Good morning, everyone. Thank you for making the adjustment in terms of time. The House Democratic majority this year has passed approximately 400 bills and sent them to the Senate. Approximately 275 of those bills are bipartisan in nature. 100 bills have made it to the president's desk and been signed into law. We have passed legislation to lower health care costs, to drive down the high price of life-saving prescription drugs, to protect people with pre-existing conditions, to increase pay for everyday Americans by raising the minimum wage to $15 per hour, to address more than 1 million dreamers who are Americans and contributing to their community and deserve to remain. We've passed legislation to reauthorize the Violence Against Women's Act, to provide equal pay for equal work in terms of paycheck fairness regardless of gender. This week we will pass legislation to fully fund the government and to invest in domestic program after domestic program after domestic program to benefit working families, middle-class folks, and senior citizens. We will also pass the United States-Mexico-Canada trade agreement consistent with our commitment to the American worker and to organized labor, and to do it in a way that has the overwhelming support of the labor movement in this country for the first time in history. We've kept our promise to the American people that we would fight for everyday Americans consistent with our For the People agenda. This week alone shows the difference between a Democratic majority in the House and a Republican majority, which we had in December of 2018. In the prior Congress, the signature legislative accomplishment was to pass the GOP tax scam, where 83% of the benefits went to the wealthiest 1% in America. It was a sham, a scam, and a shakedown of everyday Americans. This week, we will move legislation on the floor that restores some fairness to everyday Americans, to middle-class folks, to those who aspire to be part of the middle class, by beginning the process of restoring the state and local tax deduction, which was stripped away to give a tax increase to the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected. That was unconscionable. But a House Democratic majority will begin to reverse the damage that was done by House Republicans in the last Congress. Last year at this time, we were beginning the process of heading into a reckless 35-day government shutdown because Donald Trump wanted to hold the American taxpayer hostage in order to get billions of dollars for a medieval border wall to satisfy a political promise that he had made on the campaign trail. And we stopped him from doing it. This year, under a Democratic majority, we are fully funding the government. Let me now yield to my distinguished colleague, my good friend, the dynamic vice chair of the House Democratic Caucus, Katherine Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I feel like because I'm always second, I never get to introduce you as our dynamic chairman. So I will take that moment today. To continue on the words of the chairman, one of the areas that we were able to make great progress for the American people were in the 12 appropriation bills that came out of the House Committee on Appropriations back in June that represented tremendous progress, areas of research, investment in childcare and education and apprenticeships, making sure that we are building resiliency for climate change in our communities, that we are investing in clean air and water and the EPA. We put $50 million into gun research for the first time in decades. And we waited. We have waited for the Senate to take up these bills. It caused a CR back in the fall. And today we stand here with an agreement with many of the priorities of the House captured, but with still work to do. Some of the highlights are, for the first time, the House has been able to secure $425 million to help states protect their elections. As we are working on multiple tracks this week, we know the threat to our 2020 elections from this president and the way that he has corruptly invited foreign interference into our elections. This funding will be critical in helping states keep the ballot box between the American voters and their decision alone on who to vote for. There's also $25 million for gun research. Which is, again, the first time in decades that we are going to be able to research how we can prevent gun violence in this country. And as we just sadly commemorated the 7-year anniversary of Newtown, it is way past time that we start making this investment. And two of the key bills that are being held up by the Senate are two bills we passed back in February around expanding universal background checks and making sure that the loophole for background checks that allowed the Charleston shooter to get his gun illegally is closed once and for all. We've also included over $7.5 billion for the census, which is going to be critical as we go forward to make sure that everyone is counted and make sure that we have the full count that is necessary that states are counting on for their federal funding. And there is a $9 billion, which is over $200 million increase for the EPA to try and protect our clean air and clean water. We know how the impacts of climate change, and we know the impacts of this administration that is trying to roll back protections that are so vital for how we address this crisis. There's a $1.1 billion increase in childcare that is going to enable the children of this country to get the best start that they can. And we know if we have kids reading at grade level by 3rd grade, that is a game changer for them and opens up opportunity throughout their lives. We didn't get everything that we wanted. These were difficult negotiations with the administration and with the Republican-led Senate. But our commitment to the American people was to keep government open and to make every bit of progress that we could. And as we have the impeachment vote weighing on this Congress very heavily, that we're going to be taking up tomorrow, we will continue to move forward with the For the People agenda. And we will continue to be clear that we came here to uphold an oath of office that includes upholding the Constitution. And that we are going to continue, as we did from the beginning of this impeachment inquiry, to follow the facts, to let the truth be our guide. And it is not an easy vote. I greatly admire the unity that we are seeing out of this caucus, that it may not be politically expedient, it may not be easy. We don't know how this may or may not affect the 2020 elections, but we know this. We have this opportunity in the history of our country to stand up, defend our Constitution, and send the clear message not only to this president, but to every president in the future, that we are a co-equal branch of government that is going to insist that no one is above the law.
Thank you, Catherine. Questions?
On impeachment, the polls coming out show the American people actually do believe the case that you guys laid out, the facts, they agree. But the poll numbers show that the country is still pretty much evenly split, if not leaning towards against impeachment. What is the the Democratic response to this? Given that you guys are going to be voting on this in 24 hours.
Well, we're a 50-50 country divided on a whole host of issues, and we've decided to proceed based on our constitutional responsibility in terms of the president's abuse of power, which continues to hide in plain sight. In fact, the president's abuse of power is a constitutional crime in progress. Over the last few days, Rudolph Giuliani, the president's political henchman, returned from the Ukraine to continue the out-of-control effort to acquire dirt on a political opponent, which has been reviewed, is at the heart of the Trump-Ukraine scandal. The polling numbers that I've seen, most recently from Fox News, have suggested that more Americans support the effort to hold the president accountable by impeachment and removal than are against it. In fact, in one poll, I believe it was a 15-point split in an otherwise evenly divided nation. But we're not concerned with poll numbers. We're not concerned with the political implications. We're not concerned with the impact on the 2020 election. We're concerned with the Constitution. We're concerned with abuse of power. We're concerned with the undermining of our national security. And we're concerned with the effort by Donald Trump to corrupt our free and fair elections.
You were talking about the GOP tax bill. Why aren't you concerned about the risk it could pose to the majority if you do want to pass these other items in the Democratic agenda? It seems like losing the majority could prevent that future. You're pretty confident.
Today, we're going to fully fund the government consistent with our responsibility, including constitutionally, the House of Representatives through the origination clause as the preeminent institution to allocate taxpayer dollars. Today, we will fund the government. Tomorrow, we will hold the president accountable. On Thursday, we will pass a historically progressive trade agreement. The business of the people has continued. Last week, we passed the National Defense Authorization Act that includes paid family medical leave for millions of federal workers and military families for the first time in American history that will lay the foundation to do so much more. And so we are continuing with the business of the people, but we do have this responsibility to hold an out-of-control president accountable. We're not going to shirk from that constitutional responsibility, but the center of gravity for the House Democratic Caucus will remain getting things done for everyday Americans. I yield to Catherine.
We don't know politically where this is going to land us, whether it will be a threat to the majority or whether it won't. But there's no choice here. What we have is a constitutional crisis. What we have is a president who keeps telling us exactly what he did and what he will do in the future, and we have to believe him. Back in June, he said he would take political dirt from a foreign government again, and no, he wouldn't let the FBI know. We all know his call with the famous line, "Do us a favor, though," where he was willing to sell out the integrity of our elections, willing to sell out our national security, willing to sell out a country that desperately needed our help in a war that Russia is waging on them for political dirt. Then he took to the microphones on the South Lawn And he said, yeah, you know, we should investigate in Ukraine, and China should investigate my political opponents too. Then we had Mick Mulvaney say we should all just get over it. Corruption is just the way it goes in this administration. And then just this past weekend, we have Rudy Giuliani saying, yes, we had to get rid of the ambassador, Yovanovitch, because she was going to stand in the way of our corrupt investigations. There has been a lot of talk and a lot of action in Ukraine on corruption from this administration, but it doesn't come from the Ukrainian government. It comes from the White House and this president and those who are enabling him. So there are certain points. I was co-chair of the Red to Blue program last year, traveled the country, and everywhere I went, there were people who had never voted for Democrats before, and one of the unifying themes was, we've got to get corruption out of our own government, return the voice to the people. This is where we stand, not because we want to, not because we think it is necessarily a political winner, but because that's our oath of office. And that is our duty to this country at this point in our history. And I hope that my Republican colleagues, both tomorrow in the House and over the next few weeks in the Senate, will feel that call of history, will feel the call of the oath of their office, and put aside not just partisan divide, but a pledge of allegiance to a particular president. This is exactly what the framers feared: foreign interference and corruption. It has resulted in abuse of power and obstruction of Congress, and we cannot let that stand for this country to continue to be a thriving democracy.
You guys, over the last 24 hours, have had several high-profile frontliners come out. Kendra Horn just a minute ago from DC, earlier Mikey Sherrill, Cunningham, etc. Several of those were kind of on the watch list for how they would vote on impeachment. I'm wondering if you think Van Drew switching parties had any impact on their thinking for whether to vote for this or not, and what you think about him defecting and joining Republicans.
Well, as Speaker Pelosi has consistently indicated, we are not whipping the vote as it relates to impeachment. It's the most solemn undertaking that any member of Congress can have as it relates to our responsibility as a separate and co-equal branch of government. It's the ultimate form of accountability when a president like Donald Trump has gone rogue, and every single member is going to have to make that decision, as they have been doing, anchored in principle. Jeff Van Drew has made a decision that he believes reflects the perspective of his district, and ultimately, Jeff Van Drew will have to answer to the people of the 2nd Congressional District in New Jersey. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.